Hello. The program will be starting in just 5 minutes, and we are looking for William Brownfield. If William Brownfield is in the room, can he meet me at the back? Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please find your seats. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you all for being here, and welcome to the CEL event as part of the Biennial of the Americas. Our co-sponsors for this evening's symposium have been instrumental in helping put all this together and bringing everyone who you're going to hear here in just a minute. So I make sure you get a chance to see them. Each one of them has an important mission that relates to tonight's discussion. Now, tonight we have a remarkable program with 5 of the foremost experts from across the Western Hemisphere in terms of security. But first, we'd like to do a United States salute in celebration of this event, so please stand for the national anthem and the presentation of the colors. You may be seated. I apologize, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm John Hickenlooper, the mayor of Denver. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Biennial of the Americas is a celebration of the unique culture and ideas of the people of the Western Hemisphere by bringing together leaders from the 35 nations from Canada all the way down to the tip of Chile, from all the Western Hemisphere, and bring them together with arts and cultural programming with ideas around innovation. We hope to raise awareness and facilitate understanding, promote collaboration and trade. The great diversity of the Americas is going to be on display the entire month, and I certainly encourage you to, as often as possible, participate in the incredible forums and events and other activities. Tonight's event, I think, highlights how we can work together in all sorts of issues, and especially around how we can work together to stop terrorism through transnational security. The proliferation of terrorist attacks continues to shock the world. It reminds us that our world as we know it is by no means a tranquil place. While traditional disputes and conflicts touched off by ethnic, religious, territorial, or natural resource problems keep cropping up, non-traditional security threats posed by terrorism, illicit drug trafficking, alien smuggling are increasingly pronounced. Given their global presence and their global nature, these challenges cannot be resolved by relying on the resources and the strength of a single country. Global problems, by necessity, require global solutions. To cope with the threats and challenges of terrorism, many countries are examining how they can work together to find real solutions to the problem. They have stepped up the dialogue and cooperation at both the multilateral and bilateral levels. I think the greatest test in the 21st century is going to be the ability of nations to work collectively to meet the challenges of this new security order. National security has become, in every way, interdependent with global security, and it really is now at the forefront of our national diplomacy. Presenting continued opportunities, this diplomacy is presenting continued opportunities to find common ground, points of collaboration, ways that we can work together. We've taken considerable steps and measures here in Denver to cooperate with local, state, and national authorities to make sure that we keep our city safe. This endeavor requires cooperation at every level, including the need for that transnational security cooperation. Not only do our day-to-day operations require domestic and international coordination, but Denver really has become a hotspot for international events, including such as the one that you're participating in tonight. As you do international events, there becomes a greater responsibility to really be aware of the threat and to really enhance our capabilities to ensure our community's safety. Educational forums like this one and others that the cell puts on continue to bring to light this necessary level of awareness and help to educate in this endeavor. The Counterterrorism Education Learning Lab, the CEL, is our co-host tonight, and they really have been the forefront of this. They're a nonprofit organization in Denver dedicated to addressing these threats and really combating terrorism. The CEL educates and raises awareness about these issues through its renowned exhibit, Anyone, Anytime, Anywhere, Understanding the Threat of Terrorism. If you haven't seen it across from the Denver Art Museum, you should take the next opportunity to really experience it. And the CEL also puts together educational programming and a speaker series. The CEL has received not just local but national recognition. It's been praised by the Department of Homeland Security. I was talking a couple weeks ago with Secretary of Homeland Security Janet Napolitano. One of the first things she said was, well, how is the CEL doing? I was so impressed when I was there. Just today, the Community Outreach Award was given by the Colorado Department of Public Safety to the CEL for their great contributions. So certainly want to thank Larry Meisel, the founder of the CEL, for his work to educate the public on the threat of terrorism and really for making tonight's discussions take place, but for all the efforts to build bridges, not walls, but bridges, so that we can have a deeper and more pervasive understanding of how terrorism really works, and in so doing, be prepared to combat it. In a moment, Larry will be up here himself and introduce the moderator of this evening's event. But before he does that, we'd like to show a short video that we'd like you to see. So thank you again all for being here and really giving this important subject your time and attention.
Trying to figure out if it's short or really short tonight.
The threat of terrorism has no borders and affects many facets of society, both domestically and globally.
This was a deadly ambush, carefully planned.
It was one of the worst attacks against Spanish civilians.
The worst terrorist attack in Britain.
A bomb which killed 52 people.
After mysterious fumes of poison gas,
I heard from my car a very loud
Big bomb, come down the steps.
It was horrible. I just want to get home.
Terrorism impacts every ideology, nationality, and religion. The lives of people throughout the United States and around the world are equally affected by terrorism. The Center for Empowered Living and Learning is a nonprofit, nonpartisan institution dedicated to addressing the most salient issue of our time, terrorism. The CEL's exhibit, Anyone, Anytime, Anywhere, Understanding the Threat of Terrorism, provides a comprehensive look at the challenges that civilized societies face, offering educational opportunities and experiences that help audiences explore their own beliefs and values, empowering them to proactively affect change.
Terrorists don't share a common ideology. What terrorists do share is a common mindset.
Many terrorists, be they international or domestic, they're looking for a target of opportunity to make the biggest statement they can make.
Throughout the exhibit, the visitor learns about the history of terrorism and its global reach. The CEL explores the evolution of terrorism and how it has been influenced by technological advances and ideological shifts. Learn how terrorism directly affects children and how terrorist organizations produce and manipulate media to spread their message, recruit members, incite violence, and plan attacks.
This terrorism isn't our fault. We didn't cause it. It is an attack on our way of life.
Hear the voices from around the world that are speaking out against terrorism and about the tools that are available to you to combat it.
It doesn't take courage to shoot a policeman in the back of the head.
No one is looking into the problem of extremism, the problem of terrorism.
Aquí tenemos que mantener toda esta masa crítica de seguridad.
We need to cooperate with authorities. We need to help the authorities.
The responsibilities on our shoulders big.
We will come through this.
The exhibit resides in a state-of-the-art multimedia facility located in Denver's Daniel Libeskind-designed Civic Center Cultural Complex. We invite you to visit the CEL and experience anyone, anytime, anywhere for yourself.
Terror is not a new weapon. Throughout history, it has been used by those who could not prevail, either by persuasion or example. But inevitably, they fail.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Larry A. Meisel, founder of the Counterterrorism Education Learning Lab, the CEL.
I'd like to personally thank all of you that are here this evening. It's really amazing that we have such broad-based community support. Those of you that have been to the CEL, what you saw was just a small part of the depth that's available. Those that you haven't, I hope you'll visit with tickets you were handed out tonight as our guest. We think it's very important. Tonight we have an opportunity to engage with some of Western Hemisphere's leading security experts and I want to welcome all of our distinguished panelists as well as guests in the audience. Before we begin, I'd like to extend my appreciation to Mayor John Hickenlooper and the Biennial of the Americas for co-hosting tonight's extraordinary event with us. Mayor Hickenlooper has demonstrated many times his support and leadership through continuing to be involved in international events in Denver, like the Biennial, as well as addressing serious issues that affect each and every one of us. We're very fortunate to have Mayor Hickenlooper as our leader here this evening and as our host. I'd like to also recognize U.S. Congressman Ed Perlmutter, Congressman Mike Kaufman, Senator Wayne Allard, and all of the other elected officials and council generals and dignitaries in the audience tonight. Your service and support of our mission is greatly appreciated. It is unbelievable that we as a community are stepping forward in our country and focusing on such a serious item. And those things that have happened, they wonder why Colorado. And when you look around at some of the things that have happened in Colorado, I think we all know it's important that we're all involved and we're focused. I'd like to thank the Honor Guard and the U.S. Stolen Strings for their outstanding performance. It was wonderful that they were here tonight. There are a number of organizations that have helped make this evening successful. And again, I'd like you to note who the participants are that are listed on the slide. Again, bringing together in our community everybody for the purpose of supporting this event, I believe is very important. There are also many individuals and other groups that are here tonight, and I appreciate your support in being here. I want to especially thank to our feature sponsor, the Denver Post, for their tremendous help in promoting the cell and the event here this evening. I would like to recognize the cell's board of directors, its leadership, Melanie Perlman and Courtney Meisel, and a staff of Christina and Kristen, who have done an excellent job, and Laura Teal and David Cohn, who have been instrumental in planning this evening's event. I now have the honor to introducing tonight's moderator, who is truly a statesman and a leader on these issues. He is someone that has been truly a friend of mine for, I think it seems like, several decades. Since retiring from the United States Senate, Senator Gary Hart has been extensively involved in international relations and is renowned for his expertise in international affairs and national security. He is the vice chair of the U.S. Homeland Security Advisory Council, and he is the chairman of the American Security Project and distinguished fellow at the New American Foundation. He was co-chair of the U.S. Commission on National Security for the 21st Century and co-chair the Council on Foreign Relations Task Force for Homeland Security. Senator Hart holds the Worth Chair at the University of Colorado School of Public Affairs. I could go on, but I'd like to introduce him now. A good friend of ours and a good friend of mine, Senator Gary Hart.
Thanks, Larry. Thank you very much. Larry, thank you very much. I joined the mayor in saying thanks to Larry Meisel, the Meisel family, and Meisel Enterprises for the contribution they have made to this community for many, many years. The cell is only the most recent, and the Meisel tradition lives on this evening most of all. This country was traumatized on 9/11 by the slaughter of 3,000 Americans. And we have come to believe that we are, if not the only, the principal target of terrorism in the world. But as the video showed, I think 8 or 9 or maybe even 10 cities in recent years have suffered similar attacks. What we Americans, I think, have to understand, and we are here tonight to discuss this, is that terrorism is not a national threat. It is an international threat. And for all the steps that we in America have taken to defend ourselves, we cannot do so without the thorough cooperation of our friends and allies around the world, and indeed, even countries with whom we have not been friendly over recent years. For example, the Russians are under terrorist threats tonight. We did not take those very seriously until we ourselves were attacked. But the list goes on, and as we acknowledge the fact that terrorism is indeed an international phenomenon and threat, we can also not permit the allegations of terrorism to shade our commitment to civil rights and civil liberties for people around the world. This is a delicate balance, and one that I think this panel tonight will discuss. I want very briefly to introduce our panelists. I could read their bios, but it would take a great deal of time. These are extraordinary individuals, and I want you to meet them. First of all, Ambassador William Brownfield, who has been the U.S. ambassador in the troubled country of Colombia for the last 3 years. He is a career Foreign Service officer, and his career has been spent largely in Latin America and in this hemisphere. He's had a number of postings in military and law enforcement affairs, and his posting to Colombia, as I said, began 3 years ago, and that in and of itself has led him to be an expert in the field we are to discuss tonight. Please welcome Ambassador Brownfield. I want you also to meet Commissioner Ralph Basham. He is the former Commissioner of U.S. Customs and Border Protection, the Border Protection Agency, which employed at its peak 53,000 people. Prior to that, he was most distinguished for being the director of the Secret Service and was, in fact, a career Secret Service agent. And as the beneficiary for a number of months of Secret Service protection, I can tell you this is one of the most professional organizations in the United States or anywhere in the world. He has supervised federal responsibility for airport security since 9/11 and has held a number of most senior posts in national security. Say thank you to Commissioner Basham. We want to welcome a foreign guest, Mr. Oscar Morales Guevara. Mr. Morales is an extraordinary individual. As you can tell, he is young. He founded an organization that became a foundation called 1 Million Voices to raise public opposition against terrorism in his home country of Colombia. That inspired the creation of something called the Alliance of Youth Movements, created 2 years ago in 2008. And he was, as a result of this, appointed the youngest counselor to the UN's One Young World. He is a fellow at the present time of the George W. Bush Institute in Dallas, and he's recognized worldwide as one of the youngest organizers of public support in opposition to terrorism around the world. Say thank you to Mr. Morales. I have left our fourth panelist last on purpose. He is General Victor Renoir. Many of you know him because he has been most recently, and indeed until very recently, commander of both the Northern Command and the North American Aerospace Command, formerly NORAD, located in Colorado Springs. He has been a distinguished combat pilot, and he has been the principal military assistant to the Secretary of Defense. General Renoir retired after more than 39 years in the uniform of the United States of America, July the 1st of this year, less than a week ago. I would like for you to join me in saying thank you to him, and if you choose to do as I do, to stand in doing so, I welcome you. Thank you all very much. Mr. Morales, there is a tendency on the part of all of us to think that protection from terrorism is the function of the military, of law enforcement agents in our country and your country, around the world, maybe even of diplomats. But you have taken an extraordinary step of involving ordinary people, young people in your country. Would you just begin by saying a word of the role that you think everyday citizens in the United States and Colombia, throughout this hemisphere and throughout the world can do to help protect ordinary citizens from the violence of terrorism?
Well, first of all, I'm honored to be here. Good night to everybody. Good evening to everybody. The involvement of civil society is part of a solution. Some people like us, like each one of you, watch the news and we see attacks and we see kidnappings and we see all kind of terrorist actions from revolutionary movements or terrorist organization. In Colombia, we already have both. They are revolutionary movements and they are also a terrorist organization. And all we did in the past was complain in the front of a TV set. That's all. We complain, we go to the supermarket, we go to the bank, we go on a bus, and we complain and complain that the government is not doing enough. And then I grew up hearing John F. Kennedy say, it's not what the country can do for you, it's what you can do for the country. I mean, that sentence really defined what I was feeling about. Like, what can I do more? So all of a sudden, I discovered the power of technology and all the people that were complaining and were thinking the same way that I was feeling. And we decided to launch a movement against terrorism for good. Like, I want to speak up. It doesn't matter if it takes 5 people or if 10 people are going to join me. And then when it happened, when the protests in Colombia turned into a millionaire movement of people just marching against violence, they were fed up with violence, it gave so much support to the army, to the people who were in captivity, to those soldiers who were risking their lives for defending the security of the country. So it all made sense. Because, you know, in Colombia, you can tell that Ambassador Brownfield, the army was complaining and the government was complaining that they felt alone, that it was a one-way effort. And now when they feel that the civil society in a majority are taking actions and are supporting the actions of the army, are actually saying and demanding to the terrorists that stop it, we're not going to take it anymore. And it takes a lot of anger too. I mean, maybe when I speak, you will see that I'm somehow angry. I'm not now, but I am when it comes to Colombian affairs. And what happened is that the whole country decreed, we are fed up with violence. We are not allowing this to happen for another 40 years. This has to stop. And then the compromise of the society, along with the efforts of the government and along with the efforts of the army, have created a new country. And I would like you also to speak about how Colombia has been an example of how to advance in our fight against the terrorists.
Commissioner Basham.
I'd like to point out that for Colombia, it was a very real was something happening on a daily basis. The terrorism, the killings, and I think the mayor made a very good point earlier by stressing, we cannot become complacent here in the United States because we don't see that on a daily basis. We get these episodic events like the Richard Reed, the shoe bomber, or the liquids threat from the UK, or Abdul Madala on the Christmas Day. Those things bring these issues to our consciousness, but we've got to be concerned. Look, they are going back and they're re-engineering. They're looking for ways to attack this country, and they're not going to stop. And several of these events where we've had the U.S. citizens on airplanes that took, an action that prevented some very disastrous occurrences. So, whereas you had a very, every day you were living with it, we tend in the United States to forget about the fact that we have troops over there right now fighting for our freedoms, and we have to be conscious and alert here in this country to make sure we're all making sure that our children can grow up in a country that we've had the privilege of growing up in.
Ambassador Brownfield, are there lessons from Colombia that we can learn here?
Sure. In fact, Senator, I would suggest that Colombia in many ways has become an excellent lessons learning exercise on how to deal with the terrorism threat. And in fact, if I could piggyback on what Mr. Morales was saying and actually reinforce it concretely, one of the lessons that has been learned is both the importance and the effectiveness of getting popular support behind what you're doing. Example, exactly 2 years and 5 days ago, we bounced out of the jungle, a total of 15, but it included the 3 U.S. citizen hostages that had been held by the FARC for 5.5 years. I went downstream and picked the 3 Americans up about 40 minutes after they were lifted from the FARC camp and the helicopters landed. And I was talking to them in the C-130 as we were bringing them back to Bogota. And I was talking to 3 guys who got up that morning absolutely convinced that it was going to be another day out of and another 5.5 years of them staying in the jungle. And what each one of them said to me at that time was, this million man, which actually turned out to be, I would say 8 million, Oscar would say 12 million, men and women who marched in the streets of Colombia, and this was about 6 months earlier. The impact had actually reached them. They heard about it on the radios, and they were watching their FARC jailers, that's FARC, F-A-R-C, jailers as they were reacting to what was happening. The impact is definitely there. I would suggest there are other lessons we have learned. One lesson we have learned in Colombia is you have different terrorist organizations. You need a different strategy for each one. One size does not fit all. We learned that a fight against terrorism is not a Monday start, Tuesday finish exercise. It is long term, and you have to plan for the long term. We have learned that the host government must buy in. If the government is not prepared to address the terrorism threat, we cannot do it for them. We learned that the institutions have to work, whether it's the mayors or the local government officials, public services, the police. If they are not working, you will not have a long-term solution to the problem. We learned that the approach has to be comprehensive. It also has to be flexible. What you start out doing in 2000 may not be what you want to do in 2008 or 2009. And finally, I would suggest we've learned that you have to have some sort of end game in mind. Terrorism is not a black and white exercise. It is not a 9-inning baseball game or a 60-minute football game. 300 million Americans, each one will have his or her own idea as to what constitutes victory and conclusion. You had better figure it out for yourself, otherwise you may find that you're there forever.
I want to circle back on the issue of victory because we're used to fighting wars where there is a victory celebrated by a surrender and a declaration of victory. We'll discuss later on what that may mean in the so-called war on terrorism. But the theme of the evening is international cooperation on this question of an international threat. General Renwart is the successor to NORAD, commander of the successor to NORAD, which was indeed an international cooperative venture during the Cold War. And General, I'd like for you to talk about how you take, if you will, the NATO experience, or even the NORAD experience of international collaboration, and transpose that to the very, very different post-Cold War world of terrorism.
Well, Senator, I think there are the one truth, and Ambassador mentioned it just a moment ago, the one truth in a fight against a really irregular kind of enemy like a terrorist organization is that you have to attack it in many different ways. Certainly within each nation, all the elements of national power have to be brought about, and we're seeing that in Afghanistan today, a commitment for development at the same time as we see a commitment towards destruction in some cases. One of the things that was so fascinating to me after September 11th, I was the director of operations at U.S. Central Command working for General Franks. We immediately had a coalition of 60 nations, as you mentioned, Russia, generally not considered the closest of friends, was there because they felt the impact of terrorism. Small countries like Estonia and Latvia and Serbia, countries in Africa who have been affected by terrorism in their own countries, all came together to try to fight this fight. The challenge is that our consciousness as a nation is very finite. We tend to want to get past this immediate problem. We want to solve it right now and get on with life. And these kinds of threats, whether they are local or transnational terrorists, don't look at a watch. They take their time. They're very deliberate, and we have to develop a coalition that has patience. And that's been one of the real challenges. The longer we've gone since September 11th, the more difficult it is to keep that coalition together. But I would say that the one thing that we continue to see from a military perspective is that nations understand, and frankly the terrorist organizations continue to remind us, that unless we work collaboratively together, unless we pool the resources, intelligence, certainly military support, but education programs, development programs, unless you pool those together, you're not going to get at the roots that will grow a terrorist, and you still won't always be successful.
The 9/11 Commission documented that the very complex intelligence community in the United States was not talking to each other. We hope, and some of us really hope, that situation is improved, and quite possibly it has. Is there any hope that we can share intelligence among international intelligence community, in the international intelligence community, to the degree we should in our common security interest?
I'm going to let Commissioner Basham jump onto this as well, because I think what we have seen really in the last 5 years, so even since 9/11, but in the last 5 years, is with the formation of the National Counterterrorism Center, a focal point where, I'll be frank, reluctant partners were put in the same environment and almost forced in the early days to share. What we found is that collaborative effort is really paying great results. We, the U.S., also tended to be a little arrogant in that we were the only ones that could do intelligence well. And what we found, and in fact, the success that we saw in rescuing those individuals in Colombia, was the collaboration of international partners, international intelligence partners, in a way that allowed us to bring the right amount of information to bear to conduct an operation. We share, and I'll speak just from my own experience, we share intelligence with Mexico and with Canada within the North American community in ways that on September 10th, 2001, we would have never considered. We would have said, we only do this correctly ourselves. We share across our law enforcement and military agencies today in ways that were not possible before September 11th. But I'm an optimist, so let me put the other side on to say we're not there yet.
Commissioner, comment on that, but also comment on whether it was appropriate at the outset, after 9/11, to use the military paradigm where terrorism is concerned. It's a big philosophical but important question. Are we fighting a traditional war, or is this very sophisticated crime?
Well, following on the General's comments with respect to in my 39 years in law enforcement, I have never seen a time when there has been more cooperation among and sharing of information within the law enforcement and within the military. However, having said that, it remains extremely difficult to share that information. There are impediments to sharing information. Sharing information with state and local law enforcement is a very difficult process. Who can you give the information to? And we know that, quite frankly, state and local law enforcement do the bulk of the work in this country when it comes to identifying potential threats. We've got to figure out a way to share the kinds of information that you collected, that I collected, that the Bureau collects, or any other law enforcement or intelligence to be able to share it with the people who have the boots on the ground. It's a very difficult process. After 9/11, what we realized was that this false sense of security, that the two vast oceans, friendly neighbors on the north and the south, was our security. We recognized that we could no longer have our borders the first line of defense. They had to be the last line of defense. That meant that we had to go out and we had to work with our foreign counterparts, with those individuals out there who literally had the information, had the intelligence that we could share with and help them, or help us, prevent attacks on the U.S. Because recognizing that attack on the U.S. or attack anywhere else in the world affects the entire global community. It's not just about the United States. It's about world security. And I believe that unifying our border command and making our borders the last line of defense and not the first line of defense was the exact right way to go.
Is terrorism an act of war, or is it a crime?
As you know, that is a debatable issue. I think it is an act of war. Personally, that's my personal opinion. I believe it's an act of war.
Terrorists don't wear uniforms. Terrorists don't wear uniforms. They attack civilian targets. They don't comply with the rules of warfare and Geneva Conventions. They have no political agenda that can be satisfied, to our knowledge.
But it's a fight, Senator, that has to take place not only within our borders, but outside of our borders. And the men and women who are in Afghanistan today and all around the world are fighting the same enemy in the sense that it is a war. Right. We here are protecting our homeland. We've never looked at it in that way before.
And
so it's both a crime and it's an act of war. So right. I don't think we have to categorize it.
Okay. Al-Qaeda, to some people, looks a lot more like the mafia than it does Nazi Germany. Mr. Morales?
Well, I want to point out some of the things that you said about how collaboration is now happening. And I'm impressed, actually, when you said that in September the 10th of 2001, you would have never considered to share information with Mexico. And now I'm really amazed how these things are happening also in the society level. As a matter of fact, when we did that march in Colombia, everybody wanted to know, how could you? What did you use? Facebook, Google, combination of both, YouTube, and all this social media thing that that half the audience, I guess, don't understand, but only the Generation Y can understand. However,
that leaves some of us out.
However, we learned something from that. Yep. Like, it's not about showing off. Oh, yeah, we in Colombia are now the cool guy. We are now the cool country who is advancing the fight against terrorism. The first thing that we wanted, that we really wanted to do is to share everything we did as youngsters, as young people using social media to put people on the street with Mexico, with Venezuela, with Iran, countries that are in trouble. And that's the reason why Alliance of Youth Movements was born, just to share. And actually they are doing it. In Venezuela you can see a very, I would say it's a huge struggle. But the student movement is advancing, is not there to surrender when the democracy is being turned apart. And second of all, I was going to point out also another thing, that terrorism is not always, I mean, you said something like, they have no political agenda. Remember, in Spain, they have ETA. In Ireland, they have the IRA. In Colombia, we have the FARC. They do have a political agenda. They want to rule the country. They want to break down the establishment, what they call the establishment, and they really want to rule the country. They want to have a political participation for whatever ideology thinks is better for the country, but they are using terror, they're using weapons in order to achieve that.
This is, I want Ambassador Brownfield to comment on this, because the closer you edge to the line some people think is a big bold line, other people think is a fine line, between terrorism and insurgency, it gets very, very complicated politically and diplomatically.
Sure it does. Although I would suggest to all of you that to a certain extent we don't want to overthink this issue. Is terrorism a war? Is it a crime? Is it ideologically driven? Is it criminally driven? My own view is that the answer is probably yes to all of those questions, and you should incorporate that into your strategy and your approach. Anyone who thinks, for example, that you can eventually address and resolve the FARC terrorism threat in Colombia without addressing as well the fact that they are now probably the world's leading narcotics trafficking organization is bonkers. Anyone who thinks that you can address the violence that is causing so much agony in Mexico today without addressing the criminal element is out of his mind. I am not an expert on Afghanistan, but I do happen to know that more than 50% of the world's total opium supply comes now from Afghanistan. And I assume you have to integrate that into your overall strategic approach in Afghanistan. So my argument would be, depending upon the organization, the country, the location, you perhaps will assess the priorities and the weights that you're given to these relative elements of the terrorist threat. But you will basically will have to assume that you're going to have to address all of them. Otherwise, simply stated, you will not succeed.
Well, if the law enforcement community is involved, as it is, top to bottom, if the military is involved, as it is, if citizens are involved, talk just a little bit about the role of diplomacy. What is the role of the statesman or the diplomat? Virtually everyone who's commented on this, both in Afghanistan and Iraq and other places, say one thing: we cannot win this by military means alone. What else is involved?
Sure. Let me offer my views, and several of the gentlemen to my right may have their own. I'll start with the detail and then work up to the generic. The United States government, when it is deployed in most countries overseas, deploys in the form of an institution we call an embassy. At that embassy, there will traditionally be 4 different elements that are represented in an operational way: the military, the law enforcement community, the intelligence community, and the foreign affairs community, traditionally called the State Department, but it includes Commerce and USAID and the Agriculture Department as well. Those 4 elements must work as a team, or we will not succeed in addressing this threat in that particular country. Now, depending upon the country and the nature of the threat, one or more of those elements will have a higher degree of operational importance than others, but they all must work together. Diplomacy is the art, if you will, of using powers of persuasion, both public and private, communication between governments to get different governments to coordinate and do the same thing. That, in essence, is what diplomats are supposed to be doing. You rarely see it when we are successful. You definitely see it when we fail. And to a very considerable extent, when we are being successful, you almost do not see any evidence of it, because success is the absence of crisis, the absence of problems. I would suggest that in Colombia, over the last 5 to 10 years, we have been very successful on the diplomatic front. We have successfully worked with the Colombian government and a number of others to reach a common agenda in terms of what we are trying to accomplish. In other countries, which I will not name, I would suggest our diplomacy has not yet been so successful.
Mr. Morales?
I couldn't agree more with Ambassador Brownfield. You know, in the case of FARC, FARC is not only an organization that is solely for Colombians. They have branches in Venezuela, they have branches in Ecuador. I will name these countries, I can't do it. Sorry, Ambassador.
But you're not a diplomat, are you?
I am not a diplomat. No, but my point is that 10 years ago, can you imagine that a terrorist organization could have a website? They still have it in Sweden. So it's the task of the Colombian ambassador to Sweden to go there and try to shut down a website that is a publicity for terrorism, not only for Colombian terrorism, but for all kind of terrorism. So we have to set like the precedent that we need to take down those supporters of terrorism. Now the Swedish government is being, let's say, naive, and I would say is tolerant with that. I remember 15 years ago, FARC had an office in Mexico City, in DF. They have a radio station there. And what was the Colombian ambassador to Mexico doing? Nothing. There was a time in my country, sad to say that, but it was like that, the reality was like that ambassadors were only having a vacation abroad. They were just dealing with very important people of town and doing nothing. Now it's different, and this is the change that ambassador is telling. Actually, he as a U.S. ambassador, I've seen him on the news every day, engaging into all these agreements and collaboration. I would say also, Ambassador, without the help of the United States of America in terms of technology, all these gadgets, the radars, the X-rays, and the helicopters, we couldn't have been where we are now. So it's a matter of engaging public diplomacy, collaboration, technology, military, all of them together.
General, you would know better than anyone that our legacy military force structures and weapon systems carry over from the Cold War. Carrier task groups and long-range bomber squadrons and big army divisions. Yet, when we first invaded Afghanistan, we were using Delta Force, Rangers, SEALs, guys in native clothing on back of mules, very colorful description. Warfare that looked a lot more like the 11th century than the 21st. Talk a little bit, if you will, about the role of the special forces in this war crime borderline area.
Well, I think maybe first important to note that these organizations, these terrorist organizations, whether they are illicit traffickers using terror as a tactic, whether they are true insurgents that are trying to take over a government, all have found the way to operate in the seams of our freedom. They operate on the internet. They travel freely across borders in places where that's permitted. They take advantage of illicit trade and traffic as a means to move people, money, influence across borders. And so these tools that are used by these organizations are the kinds of things that we as a nation, as nations, have to find a way to fill those seams. How does that relate to the military? We found that in Afghanistan, for example, as we developed the initial planned the initial operations in Afghanistan, you had the traditionalists that said, we have these big forces, so we should take 753 C-17s to move stuff into Afghanistan and invade. And the others who said, and I think the smarter minds that prevailed said, no, we have smaller tools. First, we have an indigenous population that can be supportive. Second, we have great talent and expertise in our special forces. And we have very highly knowledgeable individuals in another agency that we can't talk about here, who all can put themselves together in a time and place to be productive. And then you take and you put the technological advantage that the U.S. brings, communications, precision navigation, precision strike. One of the great stories of Afghanistan is a Navy SEAL who had landed in the middle of nowhere in October in the snow, and out of the dark comes this Tajik warrior, literally on horses and mules, and of course doesn't trust this American. And the American SEAL says, well, I know you've got those Taliban fighters over there. In 21 minutes, I'll make them go away. And of course, this warrior says, oh, no, that's not possible. We've been fighting them forever. Unbeknownst to him is a B-52, high overhead, out of earshot. He's got a GPS, he's got a laser rangefinder, he can talk on the radio, and 21 minutes to the second, those Taliban forces went away. That's the transformational nature that we had to find a way to take advantage of, combining the technology of the U.S., the sophistication of the U.S., with really very simple means of transportation, communication, and conducting warfare. Our special forces have taken all of the tools of the 21st century and pulled them back into the 15th century in a way that allowed the Afghan fighters to be successful. We were talking before we started this evening about a mission we used to do for many years in our special forces called FID, Foreign Internal Development, or Foreign Internal Defense, sorry. And it was teams of 4 and 5 and 6 special forces folks deploying to Colombia or to Peru or to Africa in many countries, teaching the local military how to operate in that kind of environment. We see that today. We see it in Mexico. We see Colombia sharing information
with Mexico too.
And exactly, sharing the tools and the techniques that they've learned in positive and negative events, how to fight the FARC, and sharing that with Mexico to allow them to be more successful. That transnational partnership is going to be how we succeed in the coming days. We should add and contribute our technology, our advanced capabilities, but we have to understand that it has to be conducted in a way that fits the situation in the nation.
Commissioner, terrorism is a test, as you said, I think, of the federal law enforcement system, federal, state, and local. I said to Mayor Hickenlooper one time, some time back, he's not here to deny it in case I'm imagining this. I've heard he's off doing something else. I can't remember what it was. But anyway, what if he set his alarm for 3 o'clock in the morning, and the alarm goes off and he calls up the chief of police and the commissioner of the Denver Fire Department. He says there is a weapon of mass destruction in a high-rise building in downtown Denver, and it will go off at 8 o'clock, and then sets his stopwatch to see what would happen. Are we prepared for that kind of thing?
I suspect
he doesn't have time, by the way, to bring in the 82nd Airborne or the 1st Marine Division.
There has been a tremendous awareness, particularly in law enforcement, the intel communities, at the federal, state, and local levels. I mean, they practice constantly these kinds of phone calls and how to respond to those kinds, and they've been trained. And federal dollars have been pumped into that process to make sure that the first responders, when they get that phone call, they have the equipment, they have the training, they have the understanding of what they may be facing. So I have a lot more confidence that today's world versus, as you said, September the 10th of 2001, that may have not been the case because we were living in this false sense of security. But I'd like to go back to the point on, as discussed earlier, I'd like to give a lot of credit to President Calderon and the Mexican government, who came in and really for the first time became very serious about taking on these cartels and the effects that these cartels have had on Mexican society. He's done a tremendous job. But we shouldn't get euphoric over this idea that we're all of a sudden sharing a whole lot of information. We still have, as General said earlier, we have many challenges and we have a long way to go before we're at a point where I think we'd all be comfortable that that's happening. Hey, we haven't won this war on drugs by any stretch. And when you have an insatiable appetite, you have an inexhaustible supply, and you have the kind of money that is out there, I'm not sure we can ever win this war fighting it the way we're fighting it. We're going to have a different mentality on this. We've got to educate, we are, and as President Calderon said, yes, we're shipping drugs and illegal aliens to the United States, but you're shipping bulk shipments of money, you're shipping weapons. We have got to work this together. You've got to stem your appetite, and yes, we've got to do work together, but it is a cooperative effort. Otherwise, it is just not going to be.
Ambassador, if the Secretary of State said to you, I want you to do, you have carte blanche to do anything you choose to integrate the counterterrorism effort in the Western Hemisphere, not just, we won't say the globe. What would be the first 2 or 3 things you would think of that are not being done today?
It would depend on country by country, embassy by embassy, of course. It will perhaps not surprise you or anyone else in this audience that I'm a great believer of pushing decision-making out as far into the field as possible, giving the chiefs of mission, otherwise known as ambassadors, as much control over their embassy team as is humanly possible. In Colombia, I would literally say the sky is the limit. We are a very large embassy. We are extremely well integrated. There are almost no divisions whatsoever within those 4 communities that I described for you. The diplomatic, the law enforcement, the military, and the intelligence. Smaller countries and smaller embassies obviously have situations where they don't have every agency represented, and they're not necessarily represented well. Second, I would suggest to you that better integration of our developmental assistance, our foreign assistance, with the terrorism threat is something we're going to have to do increasingly in the future. The traditional aid developmentalists, the purists, become resentful when they see their development efforts polluted by political or other objectives, their word, not mine. I think we're going to have to accept that it's going to happen. I believe, for example, at some point in time, the FARC in Colombia will be attrited down to the point where they will finally be ready for a serious peace process. At that point, we're going to have to add the soft side of our diplomatic efforts to this, and that is to say development that will not necessarily have as a purpose the idea of making a farmer a better farmer or a small shopkeeper a better shopkeeper, but rather satisfying a group of terrorist thugs who have been terrorizing communities for the last 45 years and satisfying them that they can in fact disarm and have some role in the future in these communities or in these regions. It will be dirty, it will be unpopular, and at the end of the day, it will be absolutely essential. And I would suggest to you that is what I was talking about when I said you've got to figure out your end game. Very rarely, perhaps the Second World War being the only time I can think of in the last 1,000 years or so, do you bring a war absolutely cleanly to conclusion where one side is clearly the victor and another side is definitively the loser. And maybe that'll happen every 500 years, but we got another 435 to wait then before we're going to have that chance again.
Mr. Morales comment on that. But also afterwards, assume this room is full of Generation Y Americans.
Okay.
No white hairs. And you were to say, based on your experience, what you think they ought to be doing or thinking about terrorism.
Okay, here's the thing. Now, I will start by answering the last question. I have something else in mind answering to Ambassador Brownfield. You know, one of the things that defines this generation is the access to information and the fast access to information, where if you hear something, you can tell to your neighbor and you can tell to 1,000, and then all of a sudden the next day all the country knows something that happened the last day. That was not like that 10 years ago. You relied on traditional media, and what if you didn't have access to newspapers and that kind of thing? So what defines Generation Y when it comes to fight terrorism is an engaged society that has access to tons of tips, tons of information. They can organize together. And I will go back to a question that he did about what can we do better, and if we are prepared. In the example that you put in the city of Denver, a bomb that is about to explode in 4 hours. I will say this. I will emphasize the commitment of a civil society like this. What if you had informants? What if you had a network, or let's say a program of rewards that you pay? You know, in Colombia, is a majority of the country is poor. We can use $50. Anybody can use $50 for whatever. What if the government has a program where I will give you $50 if you hear anything? And then you come and tell me, and I will protect your life. I won't disclose your information. And if you multiply this by 1,000, then the bomb is not gonna be there, because the neighbors will, on time, will tell, hey, I hear illegal activity in the next door apartment. So that's what we've been doing in Colombia, and that's what I'm missing in Mexico. Because in Mexico, people are so fearful about the consequences that they are being snitchers, that they are giving information to police, and a police that they do not trust. So this is the path that the society, when my part, a committed society has to do, has to speak up, has to tell the officers, hey, I see that there is a bomb being built in the next door apartment. That kind of thing.
As an aging American, somehow the system of encouraging people to be paid informants in this country probably wouldn't work. But it might in some countries. Commissioner?
Just to share a very quick story. When you talk about this issue of getting citizens to share information, I had a Border Patrol agent who told me that when he was down in Arizona, he had been befriended by a deputy chief of police from Mexico, and was offered an opportunity to make some money. And I contacted the Bureau and others, and so we let this deal go down. One night, 2 Suburbans crossed the border, got in, brought in the drugs. The next day, this deputy chief handed this Border Patrol agent a Walmart plastic bag, and in that bag was $180,000. That's the kind of problem. That's those issues that we're dealing with on the border of Mexico. The money and the corruption and the threat of corruption, it is just a huge problem.
By way of conclusion, I want to come back down the panel, starting with Ambassador Brownfield, and take a minute or two and just say what single thing you think should be done or could be done to closer integrate the nations of the world to combat terrorism, which is our theme tonight.
I'll offer 3 or 4 disjointed suggestions. First, as a diplomat, I suppose I am required to say, let's build the instruments, the international agreements that all governments, or as many governments as possible, will adhere to, or at least claim to adhere to, to give us tools to work to get the governments to work together. Second, we talk about eliminating the firewalls between U.S. government, state government, and local government institutions within the United States of America. Let's take that same concept and extend it overseas. Obviously, different strokes for different folks. Some countries we can cooperate with very closely. Some countries we should not even dream of cooperating with, but let us have enough flexibility in the structure to allow that degree of cooperation. Third, I feel strongly about this, so I will say it again. There's nothing inherently wrong with centralized decision making, but the people that are out on the front lines, whether they are law enforcement, military, intelligence, or diplomats, you want to let them have as much flexibility as possible in making their own decisions. They know what's going on out there far more than people back in headquarters. But they need to have the ability to make the decision and the certainty that unless they screw up big time, they will be backed up. In my judgment, those three things would give us a much better stitched together effort internationally to address this threat.
Thank you. Commissioner Basham.
Well, first of all, I concur with the ambassador's point of view, but I will also say that we, the United States, and General Renouard said this earlier, we've got to recognize that we don't always have the answers to all the problems. And we have to be willing to share, and we have to be willing to listen to our foreign partners out there. And I certainly agree of pushing down the decision-making process to those men and women on the front line who need information, who have to understand what it is they're looking for. We've got to give them the tools to be able to do the job that they're being required to do. But it's all about having a better appreciation that we need to share and we need to accept the fact that others can provide us.
General Renouard.
Well, I'm going to sound a little non-traditional. I'd say first, we need to double the USAID's budget. We need to grow the State Department by 50%. Because they are the people that are out there. They're the face of our country, and they're the face of many nations in coalition. Trust me, there's not a capital in the world where every chief of mission doesn't know each other well and see each other often. So we need to work that. We need to be better at information sharing. And I don't say that so much to say we need to share intelligence. We need to be better at information dominance. We need to be quicker, faster, better than a terrorist organization on the internet. We need to be able to share law enforcement and defense information transparently without 17 lawyers having to look at that bit of information. Sorry for all the lawyers in the office.
God bless them all.
Bless you all, I'm sure. But we have put oversight into this process to the degree that we really inhibit our ability. And then finally, I think we need to understand that the military is but one tool in this fight. It can be very capable, but it should not be the only tool that nations use. We need to integrate all the elements of national power, and I think we need to do that in a way that invites partners in as opposed to trying to stand alone and do it ourselves.
Thank you. Mr. Morales?
I will be simple. I will, of course, concur with everything you've said about sharing information. I would expect more summits from heads of state about raising awareness of the achievements, not only of Colombia, but of other countries that have done a great job. Even Mexico. Mexico still has a large path to follow, but Mexico has advanced in its fight against the mafias. So share information, I concur. And the second thing is about technology. I remember when I was a kid, I couldn't understand how far could just be there in the jungle. And then we didn't have radars, we didn't have satellites. They were there, but they were restricted only for US government use. Now we can use that. We can use all these, what I call the gadgets, the X-rays and all these, whatever you invent, I am not a military, but I understand that they have a lot of technology. And the climax of that, and I want to tell an anecdote, was Ambassador Brownfield remarked Operation Hake, where the Army were able to rescue Ingrid and Kurt and 3 American contractors and 11 soldiers. And it was because we had the technology to circumvent their communications. We made a plot against the terrorism by dealing with what they were using in terms of communications. And if it weren't for this technology, no Operation Happy would ever have happened, or Operación Camaleón, or all these fancy successful operations of the Army. So collaboration is not only about information, it's about access to the top-notch technology.
We did not defeat imperialism by ourselves. We did not defeat fascism by ourselves. We did not defeat communism by ourselves, and we will not defeat terrorism by ourselves. This is an international challenge that affects a lot more people than just those of us in the United States. We are fortunate in this country to be as secure as we are, but we are not as secure as we'd like to be, and probably never will be. I hope the lesson that you have learned from this distinguished panel is that we are all in this together, and it is together that we will overcome this challenge. I thank Mr. Morales, General Renwart, Commissioner Basham, Ambassador Brownfield, and I want, as we turn the platform back to Larry Meisel, I want you to join me in thanking this distinguished panel.
Thank you, Larry.
Thank you all very much. We appreciate your attendance, and have a nice evening.